Have you had moments where you feel like you almost understand the nature of the self, of pure awareness, where you get a glimpse of something clear and spacious and free, but in the very moment you try to hold on to that glimpse for a bit longer or to grasp it more fully, it just completely disappears? If so, you should know that nothing wrong is happening, and it has absolutely nothing to do with your ability or your intelligence at all. There's actually a really good reason why this happens, and I'm going to be talking about that in this video. And I'll also explain what the solution is in terms of cultivating and expanding the awareness of the self. But I'll just introduce myself first. I'm Katharine, and on this channel I share the insights and practices that I gained from living in an ashram in the Himalayas for 15 years. So if you enjoy these teachings, do subscribe to this channel, and you can also sign up for my short weekly yoga philosophy email in the description box below as well. So coming back to the point of this video, there's a verse in the Katha Upanishad which gives a clue about what's happening in these moments where the self seems to disappear just at the moment where you're going to get it, as it were. The verse describes the self as most refined and beyond the capacity of the intellect. So to put it simply, this means that not even Einstein would have been capable of grasping the nature of the self with his intellect. And that isn't because the self is too complicated or too distant, rather the opposite actually. It's because the mind is simply not the right instrument for knowing it. But then what do we do? Because most people come to this path wanting to understand, wanting clarity, wanting to make sense of things. So firstly, it can be really helpful to understand why the mind isn't the right instrument for knowing the self. So imagine a row of students in a classroom, one behind the other. The student at the front represents our 5 senses: hearing, seeing, smelling, touching, tasting. So she can only understand what's in front of her, the teacher and the blackboard maybe. She can't see or know the mind or anything that's behind her. In just the same way, our senses can only sense things that have shapes or forms of some sort and that are external to them. They can't look back and see the mind that's sitting behind them. And that's because the senses are just instruments. They don't have their own capacity to know, in just the same way that a pair of glasses doesn't have its own capacity to see. So then moving to the next student back, the mind. The mind can see and understand information from the senses in front of it, but it can't see who's sitting behind it. So in terms of this analogy, when I say mind, I'm actually referring to what's called man or manas in Sanskrit. It operates on the basic level of I like this, I don't like that, I need, I want, I'm afraid. It's the primitive, more animalistic aspect of our thinking. But sitting behind the mind is the intellect, or buddhi in Sanskrit, which is the more intelligent, discerning aspect of our thinking. So the intellect is aware of the mind and aware of the senses in front, but it can't see back to the ego or to the self sitting behind it. So the intellect gets the information from the mind and senses, and it can think abstractly about that information and can form judgments about it, make decisions, and so on. So let's say the eyes, obviously part of the senses, see a big piece of chocolate cake. The mind gets the information about that cake from the senses, and it thinks, yep, I want that. The intellect sees all of this happening. It sees the cake and it sees the mind's thought about the cake, that I want it. But the intellect's able to bring in other information and assess the situation and think, well, yeah, my mind says it wants it, but I've already had enough to eat today, and I know I actually won't really feel that good if I do scoff it all down now. So the intellect is aware of the mind's thoughts, but it's free to decide whether to listen to them or not. But I'll repeat the most important point again. No matter how sharp or refined the intellect becomes, it will never be able to look backwards and know the self, because it only works on the information that comes from the senses and mind. It can only operate and think about things that have some kind of form or quality, even if it's just a really subtle one. But the self has no form, no quality. It's not a thing. It's actually the knowing of all things. The student behind the intellect is the ego, or ahankara in Sanskrit. The ego in this context is really just the completely false sense that I'm the one experiencing all of this. I've actually made a separate video about this illusory function of the ego, and I'll link to that in the description box as well. But in this classroom, the ego is a kind of phantom student in the line. It doesn't have the ability to see or know anything, but it claims the functions of all the other students as its own. If you smell burning, the ego says, I smell burning, as if it's the senses. Then your mind thinks, I'm frightened, what's going on? Why am I smelling burning? The ego then is identifying as the mind. And then when you think, I don't need to panic, I'll call the neighbours downstairs and see if they burnt something, the ego is assuming itself to be the intellect at that point. So it kind of claims to be all of these things, but it can't see back to the real source of awareness, of knowingness behind it, which is the self, pure consciousness. So we finally come to the student at the back, the self, who's the most unassuming of all the students, but is the one who sees everything. And the self not only sees everything, but is actually the only one with the power of seeing or knowing anything at all. The self permeates everything in front of it and lends its knowingness to the senses, to the mind, and to the intellect, which are all just instruments of pure knowingness, but not the knowingness itself. So in the way that I described the pair of glasses earlier, maybe we could say the mind and intellect are kind of filters on those glasses. So the self sees all of it. It even sees the ego, the sense I am something, which is sometimes there and sometimes not. For example, in deep sleep and in certain states of meditation, that ego sense isn't there. It's completely absent. But regardless of whether the students in front of it are awake or asleep or present or absent, the self is always present. It never goes anywhere. So coming back to our main point, can you see here that however hard it tries, the intellect will never have the capacity to know the self? Because, and I'll just run through them again, number one, as I said, it can only think about information that's come through the mind or senses. Two, it can't look back at its own source. And three, it doesn't have any awareness of its own. The knowingness that appears to belong to the intellect actually belongs to the self. In other words, the intellect can't know the self because it's being known by the self. But the problem is that most of the time, our senses and mind and intellect are just so busy and so loud that the pure knowingness of the self gets completely absorbed in what they're doing and forgets its own nature. In the same way that a person watching a movie can totally forget themselves and become totally absorbed and identify completely with what they're watching. So then, in order for the self to have a chance to become aware of itself, the students in front of it have to either settle down and disappear, such as in meditation, which can allow the self to have the direct experience of itself, or they have to become as if transparent, to be seen for what they really are, powerless and without any existence or awareness of their own. And this is precisely why we study, why we do sadhana, why we read scriptures and so on. It's not so that one day the intellect will finally get to understand the self. It's just a way of repeatedly removing the power of the ego, intellect and mind and letting them be seen for what they really are, so that the self can finally get a chance to notice its own presence, to notice that it's free, that it's pure, unlimited awareness. So then going back to the original question about why it is that just when you get a glimpse of the self, you seem to lose it again, is because there's been a moment of openness where everything feels clear and spacious, and that is the self shining through. And that's happened because, for whatever reason, the ego, mind and intellect have given up their usual functioning. But then the moment you try to grasp this openness with your intellect, it's wanting to understand, but the problem is that very desire or action to understand is exactly what extinguishes the open clarity that was being perceived. So then what's the solution? What should we do in these moments to prevent this from happening? The solution isn't to try harder using the same problematic vehicle, to try harder with the intellect, but rather just to be aware of what's happening, to notice when that attempt to grasp begins, and to bring yourself back to you, the real self, the awareness that's aware of the feeling that you almost got something and then you lost it. That awareness hasn't changed. It's remained exactly the same. And you can trust that awareness. You intuitively know it. It's what's brought you to this study. It's what's brought you to this video. It's what's always been present because it's what you truly are. So I'll be exploring all of this much more deeply in the Upanishads course starting this week. And of course, the very act of putting our attention on the the verses from the Upanishads is done precisely for this reason, so that the mind and intellect can be seen for what they really are. So if the subject feels alive for you and you'd like to go further in this exploration, you'd be really welcome to join the study group. The link is in the description box below. Bye for now.